Living proof you can take the guy out of New York, but you can't take New York out of the guy. You can leave now, Ted. Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. This is really important for a lot of reasons. It's a lot of reasons why we need to be here. It's important for Vermont. It's important for us to get an understanding as to what our issues are that we're going to be facing, that we're facing now, what the future is going to look like, and how we're going to marshal some of our resources. I'd like to thank Commissioner Ide for being here and bring some of the resources he has to bear on this. It's been an interesting time for he and I in the legislature this year. Judge Bent, thank you for. Man, it's going to be tough with Ted in the front row. Kevin Marcia, the chair of the Vermont Highway Safety Alliance. Rich Tatro, director of the Agency of Transportation. Representative Koch. Mike Brown from NHTSA, who you'll be hearing from later. And our Region 1 director for NHTSA, Mike Gerarsi. First of all, this is a much better looking crowd than last time I spoke in this room. Last time I was here for the Vermont Press Association. And actually I sat right over there at that table. And one of the things they did, they were here to honor Ken Squires. And I was absolutely thrilled. I got to sit over the table with Ken Squires. And when I came up to speak, I said, well, you know, it's really nice to have everyone here. And, you know, I'm sure that everyone here knows what his last television show was. And Mr. Squires was really just kind of stoically sitting there. And as soon as I said that, he just started laughing. So I asked everybody, I said, well, does anybody know what his show was? No one raised their hand. So I proceeded to start telling about his last television show that he did. And it was, Are You Faster Than a Redneck? And I thought he was going to fall out of his chair as I was sitting there talking to him, in talking about his show. And all the members of the press were looking at me like, first of all, why do you know that? And second, you know, why would you be talking about it? So I talked about it for a while, and then I went back over, and I didn't know what he was going to think. I didn't think it might be one of those things he just might not want to push out there a lot, that was his show. And so I sat down the table, and he just calmly reached over, put his hand on my shoulder, and said, so you're one of those 15 guys that watched the show, huh? And so it was a great time. But as we start going about our business today and looking at some of the issues that we're going to have before us, I got thinking about, you know, how do we start addressing this? And what's the reality of some of the issues that we have? And one of the things that I looked back at was, I read a lot about John Adams. I thought that John Adams was a guy that was way ahead of his time. And I thought back to a time when he was a young lawyer down in Braintree, and he got asked to take on this case of defending the British soldiers in the Boston Massacre. And as you may or may not know, back in December of 1770, he actually won that case. But one of the things that he said in his defense argument was this. He said, facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or our dictates of our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts and the evidence. And I got thinking about that, and I said, that really can apply to this. Regardless of what we would like to believe, Vermont has a drug issue here that we are in the midst of. It's transcending not only the daily lives of a lot of Vermonters, but it's also spilling over into people driving while they're under the influence of drugs. It's affecting how we're looking at law enforcement and how we deal with drugs. And it's something that we don't want to believe. We would like to think it's not true, but the facts and the evidence are telling us otherwise. So one of the reasons that we're here today is to start looking at what some of those facts are, not only here in Vermont, but also across the country. And we need to start looking at those facts, looking at our processes, looking at our resources, and see how we can best utilize those resources and our community assets and start reaching out to some of these problems and come up with a better way than what we're dealing with now as to how we approach these. We've been effective in a lot of ways, but we have a lot of room for improvement. One thing that we do know is that 20 years ago, we wouldn't have been having this conversation about drug driving. We were focusing all our resources on alcohol-impaired driving, but the landscape is changing. We need to start having discussions and start bolstering how we are going to detect people that are under the influence of drugs while they're operating. We need to look at the A-Ride program, make sure that that gets out to law enforcement. We need to look at our DREs, make sure that we have a full stable and a full complement of DREs so we can address these issues in the state. We need to look at our lab. We have a model right now, a business model, that is very good for some private industry, but is not real good for the people of the state of Vermont. We need to be able to test our own blood samples here. We need to find a way to do that that makes sense for Vermont and it makes sense for law enforcement so that we can become more effective in not only at the arrest stage, but also following it all the way through to the prosecution stage. So, having said that, as Ted said, my first job is to make sure that John Philpeck doesn't charge the podium here. He's much bigger than I am, and I'm not as quick as I used to be.